Thank you, everyone. What a day. I mean, what fantastic talks. It's been absolutely brilliant. I love the idea of identifying the materials that you have and then designing from that. And we have today four fantastic guests that are joining us on the panel. They represent industry leading companies who made a climate change commitment, made a climate action plan, and they're here to tell us a bit more about their experience and their progress. I'm not going to introduce them, they'll do that themselves. We've got Ben Golem from Price and Myers. We've got Kira Kenny from Bovis, Kemi Owoye from Wilmot Dixon, and Mike White from Smith Wallwork. We are going to talk today about what those action plans were, progress they've made, challenges, and opportunities from that, and also what good advice they can give us. If you have any questions, please join the Slido. Send them to me. I've got access to them. Can we restart the Slido, please, team, so that I don't get the previous answers as well, previous questions. And yes, so thank you all for joining us today. Welcome. If you could just each of us tell us a bit more about yourselves, what commitments or climate action plans you prepared, and what you have achieved. Shall we start with Mike?
Yep. So I'm Mike. So I'm an associate at Smith Wallwork. We're a small firm based in Cambridge. So we just hit 20 people last week, in fact. So we've been logging our materials data since 2014. So when Structural Engineers Declare sort of came about, we already had an idea of where we were starting. So most of our commitment was around reporting, basically, and holding ourselves to the standard that we'd already measured. So we knew we were in quite a good place compared to current targets. So we then set about reporting. So we prepare our carbon report annually. That's on our website. And also every 5 years or so, we do a book with a bit of a rundown of our materials and carbon that we've specified on projects over that period, and a bit more sort of granularity on specific projects. So it's really trying to be transparent about the data to try and encourage ourselves to hold ourselves accountable for what we've done since joining SED.
That's wonderful, Mike. Thanks. Ben.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Ben. I'm an associate structural engineer at Price and Myers here in London. So our work, we're kind of maybe 150, I think, over our studios, and our work covers everything. So everything from kind of small domestic work up to kind of several £100 million kind of huge projects. So in 2016 was where it all kind of began for us. So we had an Innovate UK funded project at Cambridge, and that was kind of based on carbon intensity and efficiency. And so we did a lot of really good research looking at how we can measure the efficiency of buildings. And what this showed is actually a lot of the carbon intensity was baked in at these early stages. And this kind of led to development of software, which was called Structural Panda, which I think some of you probably know. It's out there in the market now. And this led to a huge sort of, as well as the actual software tool, it led to a huge amount of knowledge and experience across the practice. And so when the declaration movement came out sort of 5-6 years ago, we were in a really good place. We had a lot of kind of background knowledge. We didn't really know what to do with it. And the partners were really keen to not just sign the declaration, they wanted to have some kind of plan in place. So we could, not just kind of empty words. So then a small kind of dedicated group of us formed the Climate Action Group, and one of the first things we did was to start building our own database, very similar to what Mike and his team have done. So we did this back in 2019, and we built our own tools because they're now available. And then we made a decision in 2020 to publish this on the website. So this is now grown to kind of 500-600 different individual calculations. We published the 5th version earlier this year. As far as we know, it's the largest public database for building structures, but someone please correct me. And really, what's been really good is that this has been used as the kind of average benchmarking for a lot of the kind of targets that people are using day in, day out, particularly now the NZ CBS. I get that right? Which is great.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben, for that. Kemi.
Yeah, my name's Kemi Owoye. I work for Wilmot Dixon. I'm a structural lead. but I focus on sustainable design. So my role sits primarily with new business, and the idea is to try and take what we do in design management forward and investigate some of the high-level sustainability targets on jobs earlier to see if the developing designs are reflecting what the client wants, to see if there's an opportunity to increase that without affecting the cost or the program, and to just try and make sure that if it's not in the brief, we can put it there, and if it is in the brief, we protect it. So part of my role also will then involve trying to track it as it goes through at specific mile points to say, did we do it? If we didn't, why? What can we change to make it work properly? So in terms of climate action plan, so Wilmot Dixon has been carbon neutral in its operations through offsetting since 2011. And I think since we started our baseline in 2018, we've reduced absolute carbon by 48%, but we measure scope 1, scope 2, and only selected scope 3 where we have confidence in being able to report it. So that's how we are as a business, but I always like to think of the buildings that we build as well, and we've got our Now or Never strategy that was launched in 2020, and it covers 3 broad streams. We build brilliant buildings, we build lives, which is more the social side, and then we leave a better planet, so that's environmental. And those 3, we have targets which we track from 2020 and we review annually, and through to 2030 and 40, we want to be our major projects and refurbishments to be net zero carbon in operation, and then also net zero embodied carbon. We want to support our supply chain, which is obviously our scope 3, which is where the majority of our emissions are. So
That sounds like a really big ambition. Thank you for sharing. And Kira.
Hi everyone, my name is Kira. I am an embodied carbon specialist for Bovis, a main contractor previously known as Lendlease. And my role is essentially to try and get reduction initiatives out of roadmaps and into reality. So making sure that embodied carbon is front and center in our robust processes, that is integrated into our day-to-day decision making and our project workflows. And we hit our 2025 net zero target for scope 1 and 2 3 years early. And as Lendlease, we had an absolute zero by 2040 target, including scope 1, 2, and 3, without offsets, and as I like to say, without excuses. Now, in the transition from Lendlease to Bovis, the science-based target has gone with it, which means that we need to set a new one. And rest assured, it will have a similar level of ambition, and I'm sure we'll be really excited to share that with you in due course. And in the meantime, it has in no way meant that we're resting on our laurels. We still very much so have our foot on the accelerator, particularly for our projects in reducing our scope 3. So really excited to see what's to come.
And it sounds really exciting that you have now this opportunity to do it again. So what are your thoughts and your plans for this transition?
Well, I mean, I suppose there was always things in our sustainability plan that at a global level that maybe didn't work for the UK. So we'll get rid of the stuff that we didn't necessarily like or that wasn't really suited for the region, and then hopefully take on some other things that weren't included in it.
It's interesting that you mentioned the difference between the UK and globally. I think we could circle back to that a bit later, because it will be interesting to see how that is different. Ben, you mentioned the work that you guys did with Panda and influencing Leti in its early days. So could you tell us more about what drove that? What were the drivers for those to fund these initiatives and some of the challenges as well?
Yeah, so I mean, Panda was part of the Innovate UK project. So you get funding, and the partners kind of matched it, and it was a sort of joint investment, and that led to some really great work. That's now kind of gone out as a sort of separate sort of financial entity. In terms of the work we've done internally around that with the database, that's kind of much more of a challenge, and I think it's a constant challenge. I think there was an initial big burst of work at the beginning back in 2019 to build the tool. There were no kind of suitable tools for us available for what we wanted, so we built our own. And then it's setting that up and integrating it into your company's workflow. And I think, as anyone who knows a kind of business, everyone has their own way of doing things. It's very difficult to kind of break the mold and change things. Fortunately for us, it was during sort of height of the pandemic, so there was a bit more free time than maybe there otherwise would have been. So we had the opportunity to actually, take some sort of spare resource and actually pilot into it. So we set up this kind of initial burst of work really quickly. Since then, it's trying to keep it going. It's trying to maintain it. The initial aim was to sort of complete calculations for every project at every stage, and I think we have maybe 1,000 projects on the go at any one time across the practice, and it's just not possible. So we've had to kind of gradually not scale back the kind of ambition, scale back it in terms of what's realistic and what's actually useful. And so we have a threshold for our jobs above which is mandatory to do the calcs at certain stages, and then we kind of grade it based on the size of the project. And it's really easy to see when you're working across such a wide range of project sizes. Part of the skill is in judging when is appropriate to do it. And so, for a big project where the fees are in tens, hundreds of thousands, it's definitely appropriate, and we should be doing it. Often we have to do it as part of the deliverables. When you're looking at, even a small resi refurb or the kind of the much smaller scale job, you can't justify a full building carbon calculation to a client when you're on a time charge. They're not interested. So it's about looking at what's appropriate, and I think part of it is almost taking a step back and saying, do I need to do a carbon calculation? I know what the answer is. I know if I reduce the steel, or if I take that frame out, if I do that, I reduce the concrete, I'm going to be doing the right thing. And it's about trying to find that balance in terms of how can I make a difference while spending the least amount of time. And that's it. I think that's been the main challenge all along.
I mean, yes, and part of the declaration is to embed carbon calculations into all of the projects, at least, or contribute towards those calculations. And it's interesting that you mentioned that as a challenge, because it's a challenge that we continue to face. But Mike, you started measuring carbon back in 2014. So what were the drivers to make that decision, and how is that data influencing your projects now?
So it started off, there are a couple of different reasons to start off. The first one was a general approach that just collect the data. Even if you don't know what you're going to do with it, just record it, because once you've got it, you can start to do stuff with it. And that's been really interesting. It also partly came about through our directors, so identifying the climate crisis as an emerging issue and looking at ways of doing that, and a lot of that was via timber in construction. So for those who know us, like a lot of Smith & Warwick's reputation has been built around timber, although we do all materials. And so one of the ways that we're looking at being able to encourage timber into construction was by measuring the carbon. So you can go to the client with actual numbers rather than just saying, yeah, it's better or it's lower carbon. So actually being able to quantify it for clients. So that was a big part of the driver for the database. And so as part of that, it's really just been about collecting data so that we've always got that picture. And so all of our projects, every area, all of our projects with floor area, I should say, so excluding artworks, all projects at all our OBA stages are logged in the database, but at a relative, like what Ben was saying, are the challenges of actually doing that in reality. So we do it on a slightly macro scale, so it's main elements. We don't tend to dive into detail of counting screws and that sort of thing, unless there's a specific driver to do it on a project.
And it's about finding that balance, right? What is the right level of information and detail that is needed for the project? So interesting hearing from designers, but now when it comes to contractors, I would like to understand what's that difference in perspective. How do you influence making those good decisions? How do you embed that sustainability in the brief? And one question from the audience that is also asking that the Yellow Book is a barrier to sustainable design.
Okay, am I supposed to answer which question first?
How do you influence, and what are those barriers including the Yellow Book?
Okay, so let me start with the influence. First of all, the word influence, I think, is quite a strong word, and our ability to influence depends on when our entry point into a project. What we have seen is when we compare 2020 to 2024, in 2020 we had 11% of our projects with rebuy engagement, between REBA 0 and REBA 2, and in 2024 it was 52%, which means there's more ability to influence what the customer is doing. We have had a customer come to us and say, I'd like to tear down this leisure centre because it's old now. And when we did a bit of investigation, we saw that the steel frame was absolutely fine. So can you design around the existing frame and then you keep that instead of demolishing the whole thing? So when we have conversations that early, then we can have those conversations and potentially inform, but the decision ultimately rests with the client. So if it's early, we can look at the brief, we can suggest reuse, we can suggest alternative products quite easily. If it's REBA 4, REBA 3, there's planning permission, there's a start date, and people, definite drivers, then it's more about checking, validating, and developing in line with an existing brief. So it depends. Educate, inform.
Yes, absolutely. And what about the Yellow Book?
Yeah, so the Yellow Book, it was created it was a design manager. He went on to head our learning platform for education to provide standardized design. We found out we're having a lot of defects, and those defects were costing a lot of money. So with our mandated suppliers, for some things, we actually ended up taking the more expensive route, but it was a route that was proven to not provide defects. So it does serve as not a learning tool, but a lessons learned. So we can then say, actually, we're having this problem with bricks below ground, below surface level. So you have to use this grade of brick. Please don't do that anymore. We've had problems there. And then we can sort of cycle that round and get the learning. In terms of it being a barrier, what I like to do is I like to challenge, even though sometimes I get my wrist slapped, but I will look for the product that is good, and then I'll go back and challenge them and say, this is better, this is lower carbon. Do you have something that can rival it in performance? Otherwise, I have a duty to offer the best solution to my client.
And that is something that we've heard across the day about challenging the status quo and thinking about new ideas. And I like how you mentioned the difference between influencing and informing, and how can you, bring your clients on this journey. And also the example that you gave about the existing building. Yeah. So I'd like to then take that to Mike about existing buildings and new buildings. How has this impacted, your approach to reducing carbon emissions, the difference between those two buildings?
So it's been interesting, and it's one that I'm looking forward to getting more data on, because as small practice we don't have loads to go through, but we took a look at this in 2023. We went through our database and compared. So, the first thing we did was, on our average project, across all project types, where do we sit? And we were sitting about 60% of the LETI target for embodied carbon per metre squared. So it was like, pat on the back, right, feet up, don't need to do anything else for a bit. And then we were thinking, well, materials are decarbonising, so actually, is that true? So if we just sit there and carry on doing what we're doing, and concrete decarbonises and steel decarbonises, we'll hit net zero almost by default, just because of the materials we're using. But we thought, is that actually true as well? Because we know that materials aren't decarbonising fast enough, and there's really good work that Will Arnold did on that. So we took that and we actually tasked a summer placement to say, right, take our data and take new and existing and take materials decarbonising and mash all of that together and tell us what impact retrofit and refurb has on our personal project portfolio and our carbon emissions. And we basically found that if we just carried on doing what we're doing, which was about 85% new build, 15% refurb by floor area, if we just carried on doing what we were doing, then we would end up exceeding the LETI and probably now the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. We'd end up exceeding those targets by 2040, give or take. Whereas if we increase the proportion of refurb in our portfolio again by metre square floor area, increase that by 15% year on year, we will stay below that curve all the way to 2050 net zero. So that was partly really interesting, just to actually put some numbers to it rather than just new builds not as good as refurb for carbon emissions. But it also meant that now on bids, and generally when we're talking to clients, it's another thing where we can give them numbers rather than this kind of very high level, one is better than the other. Say, right, well, as a company, we've looked at this, these are the numbers. So we can't choose for the client what they do for their building, but we've generally found it's been better ammunition to influence them towards retrofit or even partial retention, just because it's backed up by some data. But I will qualify that. I do want to add a lot more data to that because we need more projects, basically.
It sounds like it's another incentive to reuse existing buildings. It's the fundamental part of the journey. And sometimes clients, as you said, they need that evidence, they need that data, they need that advice, looking at the hierarchy of design and build less, build nothing, build less, etc. Sometimes it's all about doing less. How has that philosophy influenced the projects that you work on, Ben?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got a practice philosophy of every conversation starts with sustainability. We try and stick with that where possible, but obviously each project is completely different. So there's a different set of stakeholders, different set of drivers, different economics and everything. So my work personally is almost entirely new build, which is quite unusual for P&M. I don't quite know why. But what we're finding is actually the sort of sectors that we work in, lots of clients are still just doing this as a box ticking exercise. So, it's to meet planning approval, it's to try and get buy-in. They often don't really care, if I'm honest. And so it's about having these conversations, particularly early stages, and trying to advise and doing it on the basis knowing that they don't really care, but we still have a duty to try and push the numbers to them and show them the impact of it. And one of those things is including carbon alongside cost, which is what the Panda software does actually really well, but we kind of do it anyway, really, because they care about cost. And so if you can align the two and show that there's often a linear relationship between the two, then they'll start caring more. I think technically, in terms of doing less, it's obvious. I mean, everyone here knows it's about looking at the grids of the building, minimising back transfers, minimising basements, etc. But I think what it's taking a step back and making sure that that initial starting point of the project is actually the right one. So, am I doing the right thing? Am I using the right material? Am I putting the building in the right place? Does the building have the right form? And we've got the data to show that, because the more data you collect, as I said, the more you have, the better steer you have for the numbers. And I think we're fortunate now that we've got this kind of data set. We know exactly where buildings likely to sit for the kind of typical typologies we work on. For an artsy framed resi building, we've got over 100 data points for as-built frames. And once you've got that kind of level of knowledge, you can really sort of pinpoint where you need to target and where your project's going to be. And then you can then drive those decisions to do as little as possible.
And many of those decisions, happen at the beginning of the process, and doing as little as possible also has to be driven from the beginning. Kira, from a contractor's point of view, how does this philosophy influence what you do, and how do you influence how do you embed sustainability and carbon conscious design into your projects?
Oh, my favorite topic. So a little bit further down the road than Kemi, so on a project level, one of the first things we do is we create a series of reduction roadmaps, not just one scenario, but 3 distinct buckets. So the first one is moderate, stretch, and then innovation. Moderate is where we ask ourselves, what can we do for free? What are the cost and program neutral initiatives that have a lot of precedent? Stretch, the carbon savings are larger, but may require some cost and program investment. And then innovation is where we ask ourselves, what would it look like if we pulled out all the stops, right? So we take that range of scenarios to bookend levels of ambition. We take all of the initiatives in it and put it on a decision-making matrix of cost, carbon, program, aesthetics, billability, etc. Then once you've done all your red, amber, green, you've got your list of greenlit initiatives, and that creates a reduction roadmap, which then informs your budget, which you do at a building level, the works package level, materials level. And then that goes into your key project documentation. So it's in your cost plan, your specifications, it's front and center in your tender documentation, where you're asking for all of the key embodied carbon data that you need. You're making sure that they comply with those targets that you set. And you then make sure that you get price and program uplifts for all this low carbon stuff, because it's not real until it's got a price tag attached to it. And instead of looking at those uplifts individually per works package, because you'd have a package manager that's upset their works package cost has gone up. You instead do a kilogram CO2 equivalent per pound spent analysis. And if you put that all in one big bar graph, essentially, the bigger the bar, the better bang for buck. And it's a much easier way of framing this conversation. So you're not just saying, oh, the price has gone up, but you're saying these top 5 initiatives are the ones that are the best bang for buck with you, and those are the ones that you go for. So then, again, it's all, in all your key project documentation, all that's left to do is to collect all of your embodied carbon data on site with a consistent returnable schedule. You deliver a low carbon building, the polar bears throw you a parade, and then
It sounds so easy. It sounds so easy. So if you can summarize that in one piece of advice, what would that be, Kira?
like a key piece of
Yeah.
advice for projects. Okay, so I think, I think the main thing is sustainability cannot belong to people that just have sustainability in their titles, right? In order to do all the things I just spoke about, you need to make sure that with your big plan, everyone is crystal clear about how that filters down to their role and to their R&Rs. I depend on, going to structural engineers to make sure that they've looked at all of the, all of the iterations of the different, all the stuff. Looked at different structural topologies and all of the grid spacing, all that sort of thing, to make sure that they've done the best they can to make sure that the materials have been used efficiently. I go to the facade engineers to make sure that they've done wind loading testing and they've rationalized the fins as much as they can while still remaining the architectural intent. I rely on my design managers and my package managers to keep me abreast of what's happening when there's change control and making sure that carbon is a metric in there. I rely on my commercial managers to make sure that all of those costings are in there. And without that, you're not going to have it. And then I guess the other piece of magic pixie dust is the culture around an embodied carbon target on a project. The projects where I find they are the most successful, I can tap anyone on the shoulder, whether it's the client, the design team, the supply chain. They will know the embodied carbon target for that project off the top of their head. You tap them on the shoulder, like, oh yeah, it's 572. And they know that because some part of their R&Rs included embodied carbon, and they know what of all the decisions that are coming across their desk, which ones related to it. So that's why they understand it. So. Yeah.
And I'm so happy that you mentioned culture, because it's about influencing that culture within the company and also outside. And that relates to developing a climate action plan. So there's a lot more chance of success if you have a plan in place. Kemi, so going back, a similar question, but about the climate action plan. So what would be the best advice you would give anyone in this room or online when they're thinking about putting that together?
I would say don't wait for perfection. Just start where you are, ask what you have, and then try and get a baseline and look for how you can improve it. There are many things Wilmot Dixon is doing well. There are many things we need to do better. But I think we took a decision that you can't do nothing. The time for doing nothing, that's past. We must do something, and we would rather try and fail, because if I fail because I tried, then that's better than not doing anything at all. And I would also say reach out to experts. It takes a village. I'm not a structural engineer. I have an architectural background, but I don't design for a living. So therefore, I think there is a very big space of influence, to use that word, at the start end, if you can design for resilience and sustainability just as a natural part of your processes, then what happens is actually already in there. So I would also say, don't be afraid to make a mistake. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. Reach out to other professionals that are there and take the learning. I saw something that you posted that was about recycled concrete in Finland. And I went to them in the office and said, remember that leisure centre that's coming down in 2 years' time? Maybe we can do this. Oh no, it's encapsulated. But then you go back, okay, can we reuse, it's encapsulated. Yeah. So it's about understanding that the industry continues to change, it continues to innovate, and we need to sort of keep abreast of it.
And if there's anything that you would do differently now that with the benefit of hindsight, anything you would do different to increase that impact?
I think it's about communication and talking internally and externally, because there's a tendency to revert to what we've always done.
going back to your point about influencing and informing. So it all ties back to the same idea, the same philosophy of communication. That's fantastic. We're coming towards the end of the panel. So before we go, Mike, so Kemi gave us some thoughts about how to put together that action plan and some advice for those listening. How was your journey creating a plan?
So I think we had a fairly good head start in that we'd already done the materials database, and we were already relatively clued up on this when sort of 2020 hit and a lot of this came. So to begin with, we probably had as I say, we were starting in a good place. From there, I think one of the challenges has been keeping that going, really. And so we're fortunate in terms of our company project portfolio. We do a lot of timber, as I say, and most of our work is local in Cambridge, where we have the fortunate situation where we have a lot of clients who are very switched on about sustainability. They already probably have their own plans in place, and there's a massive decarbonisation effort going across Cambridge. So we're pushing at an open door in that. So it's really been trying to stay on top of this, because it's that thing of once you have a reputation for something, it's a lot harder to keep that reputation than it is to lose it. You know, it takes one bad project. And so actually maintaining that has been quite a sort of conscious effort, and making sure that we're putting that front and center on projects and bids. So yeah, I think it's keeping that momentum going.
And you're absolutely right. And we, all of us in the room and online, we have to carry on and keep that momentum growing and going and growing if we want to make a difference. Thank you for that, Mike. And I wanted to end with Ben, because you guys shared about the amazing work you did with Panda and the tools, but at the same time, you didn't make a commitment towards net zero. So how do you navigate through that contradiction, and how has that influenced your approach to design?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It wasn't necessarily an active decision. We didn't sort of sit around and say, we're not going to have a target. I think initially we started collecting data. We thought about what that target would be. We set a kind of trend line internally with the kind of roughing on the scores system, sort of 10% a year or so down to 2050. And I think we just wanted to collect the data and sort of see what happened. And I think the first couple of years, we definitely saw a reduction, and we were, patting ourselves on the back, feeling quite pleased with ourselves. We had a sort of up to 20% reduction, I think, over the first few years. What we've now started to realise, now we've got sort of 5 really thorough years of data collection, and you cut through the noise, is that we're now flatlining. And I don't know, this is where I guess you have to be a bit more honest with the numbers. Like it is flatlining, and I think we've seen that part of. There's loads of sort of issues behind that, but what we wanted to avoid doing was setting targets and then constantly missing them. Because when you're trying to encourage people to do these carbon calculations and keep track of it, if you then show every year us deviating further and further from the line, people will start to think, what's the point? What are we trying to achieve here? There's lots of maybe reasons behind that, and I think, you alluded to refurb projects. We know that refurb projects are much less carbon intensive, but we don't have a fixed percentage of them in our year. So we don't record every single project in our whole portfolio. We can't physically do that. So we're picking a selection of them, often based on the fee, and that varies year on year. And so if we've got a good year with a lot of refurbs, that number might be lower, the overall carbon averages. New build projects, that's where we can really make biggest impact. We know refurbs are going to be better, but I think all the barriers that are coming in terms of building new builds and low carbon, I think, you do a carbon calc on a building that needs a second staircase and see what that does to the overall total. It's things like that, and all these things are coming in for good reason, but it's having quite a big impact on the embodied carbon. So I think what we're trying to do is just focus on more efficient structural design, and I think one of the one of the things is we're finding is that actually for most building types that we work with, there is a kind of a practical threshold of embodied carbon. So we've got all these net zero carbon targets, they're all great, it's a great exercise, but actually we're fast getting to the point where we can't really design these buildings any better without, not sort of meant as a brag, but we've got codes, we've got planning restrictions, we've got building regs, etc. So what we need to think about is more material intensity and actually focus on the metrics we can control. So how much rebar per square metre, how much concrete per square metre, because the carbon factors are also changing. The carbon calculation methodology changed last year, so you're not comparing apples with apples anymore, and we haven't really been for quite a long time. So that's where it stems from. A long-winded answer, but we don't have a target because we just want to try and design as well as possible, I think.
I think that's been a central message today. It's about good design, better buildings, good practices, good communication, good collaboration. Targets are great, but it's about behavioral changes, and it's about collaboration, it's about culture. So, I mean, it's been fascinating. Thank you for that. I know there will be other questions, and you might be dying to ask more questions. We will have some drinks upstairs, so please feel free to join our panelists upstairs and ask them all the other questions that you want to. I just wanted to thank you all for this fantastic contribution, and yes, thank you.
So I'm just going to spend a few minutes reflecting on today, but also reflecting on some of the news you might have seen last week, which is we've got the first building ever to be put forward for the Earthshot Prize. And I saw that news and I was smiling ear to ear, and that's Quay Quarter over in Sydney, which is a project by 3XN and Arup. And it is such a strong movement. I'm sorry, Multiplex, apologies. Kai's in the room going, hello. I think for me, if anyone doesn't know about that project, I'd highly recommend looking up and seeing the video of how it's constructed. But it is one of the most remarkable, fantastic examples of adaptive reuse of tall buildings that we have at the moment. And I think that symbolises the growing public appreciation and importance of the built environment in our ecosystems and in our carbon. So I think that was a really strong movement. And today we are seeing that essence and that tone of courage and the impacts of the importance of collaboration. And actually I know that we all say collaboration is key. That's a kind of bugbearer of mine, because I think we're beyond that. I think that co-creation is key, because that's where we create these kind of joyful, successful outcomes. Collaboration is almost like the passive element. It's someone has an idea and do you want to get involved? What we're seeing is the true action is when people both have those ideas. I know we have amazing examples of that with the Engineers Reuse Collective, and people have shared materials over a pint in the pub. That is co-creation, and that is built on trust and relationships. And as Roger said, life is a social enterprise. That's the true element, and that's why we're all thriving and being, because we can come together and share this knowledge together and create climate action. So some highlights for me today. Tom reminded us to consider fresh water. I don't think structural engineers ever talk about water, to be quite honest. And as a side plug, there's an amazing document by Henning Larsson in collaboration with Ramble. It's called Design as Water, and it's got the incredible prompts that you can take to design meetings that allow you to think and act as water. So water doesn't get a voice in decision making, and you can actually come as that devil's advocate, and you can come to that meeting as water and try to speak on behalf of water. I highly recommend checking that out. Annalisa told us about how important it is that we responsibly source timber and the unintended consequences when we don't. Martha told us that how we actually really should care about the chemicals used in construction materials and how that might have detrimental impacts to both our health but our future generations' health. Julian excited us about some of the potential for emerging natural materials and also inspired us to be curious more in our work. Of course, we're all limited to our billing ratios and commercial pressures, but if you can have that opportunity to be curious, there's really exciting co-creation, and we've seen that someone wants to work with you on that, so that's really exciting. Tom told us that we have this embedded ecological legacy in our forests. I like that, and our specs really matter. I know we often passively write specs, you might use it from a previous project, but actually if we carefully consider what we're putting in, we can have true supply chain impact. And Jonathan has really excited us on using coffee in our concrete. And there's some great emerging, exciting innovations on bathing our aggregates in CO2 as a method of carbon capture. And thank you all to our panel here who have really showed us the inspirational moves that you can make within your organisation, which I'm sure comes from your own personal passion. You know, I myself being in a change-making role know how hard it is, and all of us have the opportunity to make changes in our roles. So thank you for your work, and thank you all for being here today and showing courage, showing trust. And I wanted to take a moment to share something that Ian Poole, who's on our steering group, he can't be here right now because he's looking after his lovely new baby, but he said to me once that he spends an hour before and after he goes to conferences to kind of reflect and integrate some of those learnings and see how he takes it back into work. And I think it's a really hard thing to do, to actually protect that time, but I think that's really potent of how we can all, it's when you're the tube on the way home, how you're going to reflect and take some of the things that you've learned today, whether it's something about C16 timber or relationship you have met, and you can take that forward into your work. And I encourage you as well to go upstairs, meet and talk to someone new and see if there's ways that you can co-create something together. And finally, I just want to say a huge thank you to the structural engineers in our room. Thank you all for collaborating and being here. I want to say thank you so much to the institution, particularly Sunita, Lisa and Holly. Thank you for your patience. We have been organising this for some time, steering group, haven't we? So I would like to thank you for our continuous iterations of co-creation that we've had with this programme. We hope that you have seen some benefits from this programme. We're really open to feedback. I don't think we're doing surveys, and I know nobody really likes surveys anyway. So if you want to tell us upstairs how you thought the talks were, or if you've got ideas for what you would like to see in the future, we'd be really open to that. And finally, what's next for SED? So we'll be sharing these updated commitments with you soon. You'll get access to the presentations we've shared. And then soon come is we're working on a campaign and guidance on the impacts of child labour in construction materials as well. Another topic that is very rarely spoken about. So more to come. Thank you so much for joining today. Thank you to our online attendees too, and wish you a pleasant evening.